Okay, so a very warm welcome to all of you for day 3 of the Africa Resilience Hub. If you're a new joiner, if this is your first session that you've joined, the Africa Regional Resilience Hub is one of 4 of the regional hubs of the COP27 Resilience Hub. And they're there to provide a platform to hear what the key demands and needs are from each of the 4 regions, and this will then be taken to the Blue Zone at COP27. There are various ways in which we're going to be taking this to COP. We've been recording and taking notes of all the sessions, and we're going to elicit key messages from these. We also have a graphic harvester, Sonia, who's doing visual harvests of all the sessions. So please do feel free to click on the Explore Sessions part of the lobby and have a look at what we've got to offer today. And I, for one, am very excited for the sessions. And I'm going to hand over to the session organizers for this session. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Resilience Hub. To start with, let me start the session by giving a big thank you to the Resilience Hub organizers. It's a fantastic initiative that you have taken to bring all the stakeholders together to discuss, get their viewpoints, while you take it to the bigger audience at COP, which is the Africa COP happening later this year. So this is a very important session where we are talking about the topic of the day, which is private sector solutions for climate adaptation and resilience in Sub-Saharan Africa. Many of you have heard, have been in many sessions, I guess. Somebody is talking. I'm sure everybody would have been in some part of the discussions in the past where you have heard what is the role of private sector, what kind of solutions the private sector needs to bring in. This session also touches on those important topics, and we have put together a fantastic panel to discuss the solutions that the private sector can come in. But before we go into the panel, let me also introduce myself. My name is Prabhakar Vanam. I'm the CEO of KCIC Consulting. KCIC Consulting, in partnership with GIZ, is co-hosting this session as part of the hub activities. And we both thought the topic could not be more appropriate than bringing in the role of the private sector. We as KCAC Consulting have been working with the private sector space, specifically in the climate adaptation space. And that is where our interest also lies in terms of putting the private sector and adaptation at the forefront of resolving the climate issues in Africa. So without further ado, let me go straight into the session and give you some basic housekeepings as we start the session. I was specifically told to do this, by the way. First, kindly, everybody are muted, which is well-behaved audience here. Thank you so much, one of you. During the sessions, we try to make it more interactive as well, where we try to bring in some polls. So you'll be prompted to respond to some questions, to also hear you more thoroughly, more deeply. So there will be some polls, and kindly respond to those questions when you are asked to do so. Secondly, if you are able to edit, not sure if you have those rights, if you are able to edit, kindly edit your name and the organization that you belong to, and the country if you can. And lastly, if you have any questions, as and when any panel speaker is talking, please put those questions in the chat, and we'll try to do justice to each one of you. Hopefully the panel members would be kind enough to respond to each one of your answers. So kindly go ahead and put some questions in terms of how you intend to take this. Sorry for that. Hope I'm back now. Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Secondly, we will be showcasing some growth stage enterprises who are doing some fantastic innovations. Especially these are SMEs who are doing some work in the climate adaptation space. So not to bore you again, we'll show you some videos, and hopefully based on those videos, we'll be able to link how private sector is kind of coping with this big challenge. Third, we'll also try to highlight some challenges and opportunities for these adaptation SMEs. The video that you would see also talks about the challenges that the enterprise faces in day-to-day life in Sub-Saharan Africa in terms of growing, in terms of adapting to the local solutions. And lastly, we'll discuss the capital, we'll discuss the issues around technical assistance. We'll also discuss the partnerships that are required. So those would be the key session objectives. And we'll be asking some questions. But let me do so by introducing the great panel that we have here. First, to start with, from GIZ, joining us is Dennis Angel, who leads the private sector. Just say hi, Dennis. Thank you. Dennis is climate finance expert, and she has been working for GIZ for over 10 years at the interface of the private sector and climate change in Germany as well as in Africa. She is currently leading the private adaptation finance component of the global project under NDC Assist. So who better than to have Dennis, who can speak about all her experiences from the program. This particular program supports select member countries, partners, and the private sector to sustainably finance and implement the nationally determined contributions. So that's Dennis for you. Second is Soumya Suryanarayan, who is the director and impact ESG at Avishkar Capital. I'm sure every one of you would have known Avishkar Capital, who conducts this annual event where they try to bring in these SMEs together. Soumya, if you want to just wave your hand. Thank you. Soumya is a social development and sustainability professional with over 15 years of experience in analyzing and recommending growth of inclusive business models across clean energy, financial inclusion, education, and agriculture sectors. She has wealth of experience in leading and managing strategic programs and designing and implementing of ESG management systems and impact frameworks for leading agricultural ecosystems. Sounds like you, Soumya. Thank you so much for joining this panel. Third, is Elizabeth here? No, so we are waiting for one more panel member to join. She is the founder and CEO of Botanical Gardens. But when she comes, hopefully I'll do a proper job in introducing her as well when she joins. Fourth, we have, where is she? We have Judith. Judith is joining from GSMA. Judith is the Insights Manager at Climate Tech at GSMA. And she is very passionate about sustainable development and has spearheaded the design of accelerator labs that have built and tapped into locally sourced solutions and drove social inclusions to address priority development issues such as climate change adaptation and mitigation across the globe. She is highly experienced in resources and private sector investment mobilization and has managed global innovation funds that finance startups and small and medium-sized enterprises. As we speak, Judith is currently spearheading a program on behalf of GSMA, which talks about climate finance tracking, which also talks about what role the technology plays in bridging the gap within the climate finance space. So that's our panel, ladies and gentlemen, and happy to note that there are around 33 participants in this room, and hopefully that number will only go up. So the session, the way we have structured is more of panel members giving their insights. Of course, there are some questions that I'll be asking the well-informed panel members here. We will also put in some polls in between. We'll also have some videos in between, and then we'll also take some questions from the panel, from the audiences who we have here. So just to kick us off, the first question, Dennis, you're on the spot now. Just wanted to understand from your perspective, Dennis, from the projects that GIZ has been implementing, especially in the Sub-Saharan Africa. Just give us your thoughts on what is climate adaptation and resilience, and what conditions needs to be met by solution provider to qualify for financing within the climate adaptation space. Over to you, Dennis.
Yeah, good morning again. Thanks for the introduction. Can you hear me properly? Yes, I think so. I mean, what is climate adaptation? I think I keep it short. It's kind of an expert audience we have today, right? So climate adaptation, we see it as the process of adjusting to climate change and its effects. It's about understanding, planning, taking action to protect people, ecosystems, economies against the impacts of climate change that we can't avoid as it's already happening. I mean, I think the Earth average temperature already is rising and has already risen. I think it's 2.1 degree, right? 1.2 degree, right? Compared to pre-industrial levels. So this rise is causing already now more extreme weather events, changing temperatures. We can see it in East Africa now with the drought that is happening in the region. And all this leads to negative impacts, and responding to these challenges requires innovations and new solutions in various domains. So it's clear that we need to adapt. It's clear that we see in all of our partner countries the impacts already of climate change now. And at this point, we think lies also an opportunity. I mean, it's a big challenge, but we see it at least also as an opportunity when we look at the role of the private sector, and especially for companies that have innovative new ideas and that are on the ground. What we call adaptation SMEs is a bit what we are coming from here now, and are enterprises that offer adaptation solutions, so like technologies, products, services that help their customers to assess and address those climate change impacts. So it's a big challenge, but there is a bit of an opportunity in it, at least for companies. So what conditions need to be met by them to qualify for financing? I think the colleagues from the investors can answer it in many more details. So to qualify for financing by investors interested in adaptation impacts, companies must of course meet of many of their criteria, like financial requirements, which differ depending on the investor and the growth phase of the company. As this is a very important aspect, we also support all companies we work with regard to this investment readiness. However, if we look at the adaptation impact of companies and the funds that are specifically interested in this impact-related topic, there are some general conditions that we consider helpful from an impact perspective as more of a TA provider. I mean, we are not investing ourselves. So companies need to be aware of their climate change impact and the impacts in their region and on their clients, and be aware how their product or service can help their client to adapt. I mean, this sounds very easy, but in many cases, we have noticed that especially small companies lack information about climate change and don't even know that they are part of the solution with the business model they have. So awareness is one thing. SME should be able to communicate and maybe also measure their own climate adaptation impact and know about the cross benefits also related to other SDGs. And they should be interested and capable to further develop their business case and be innovative to strengthen positive development impacts and to reach new clients and markets. I mean, this is not a must-have, but this would be the ideal. And from our perspective, action and partnership with local communities is also important, so that the companies are really based on the ground, know for their operations, know the demands on the ground. And I think I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. That was quite enlightening. I mean, you used the keywords like planning, the local ecosystems, the technology solutions. You also use the words impact. And of course, as you said, you are looking at some general conditions that you need to fulfill to kind of qualify for financing under your program specifically. I also like the word when you said local partnerships. I think that is something very critical for deepening the adaptation within African space. So thank you so much, Dennis, for that. Let me come to you, Soumya. You've been providing a lot of support to SMEs, specifically SMEs and MSMEs, and various competitions that you've been doing under your Avishkar Group programs. So just enlighten the audiences here in terms of which are few of the sectors. I'm sure you're supporting a wide range of sectors within your group, but which are the sectors that are prominently visible? Of course, everybody talks about agriculture, but I'm sure climate adaptation is much beyond agriculture. So just tell us, which are the sectors which are very prominently working within the adaptation space, and which of these sectors are receiving climate financing and why?
Thank you, Prabhakar, for the question. And of course, I would like to thank the audience for joining in. And of course, KCIC and GIZ for organizing such a wonderful and relevant topic. Right. I'll probably start with a brief introduction about, very brief introduction about Avishkar Capital. Um, for those who don't know us, we are an impact fund manager of the Avishkar Group. We are a global pioneer in impact investing, headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya, and Mumbai, India. The group manages over USD 1 billion in assets and has impacted over 100 million lives, 55% of whom are women. Talking about Avishkar Capital, we have about $550 million in assets under management, and we've made 70 investments so far across India, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Bangladesh, today. And we've also recently launched a ESG First Fund, which is a $250 million fund for investing across capital structures in mid-market enterprises across Eastern Africa, South Asia, with specific focus on ESG value creation and climate being a huge component, right? So in terms of sectors, what sectors are getting funding today, right? When I think before even we get into the sectors, right, we need to understand how the large climate finance space looks like in terms of mitigation, adaptation, resilience. So the report on by Climate Policy Initiative, they talk about about USD $630 billion is invested under climate finance today, and roughly 90% has gone towards mitigation and the rest towards adaptation, which shows clearly that there is a lag in adaptation, right? And it remains far below the scale necessary to respond to existing and future climate change. The funnel grows even narrower when it comes to adaptation finance for developing countries. And I recently came across a report in Kenya specifically that talks about how 79% of the climate finance went to mitigation projects and only about 11 went to adaptation, and about 8% across in cross-cutting issues. So this is the landscape of the climate finance. And when you talk about actors, who is investing, right? The public sector accounted for almost 51% of the investments and largely coming from DFIs. And the public sector is leading all of the adaptation financing. And of course, it's being but again, it's a very small part of the public finance component itself, adaptation. And when you talk about private climate finance, right, it is again forms the rest of the entire climate finance, and majority of them are corporations, commercial FIs, all of that. And all of those also went to high income countries, and Canada and UAE being some of the countries that went to. And when you look at the PVC impact investors, the contribution to climate finance is negligible, but there is definitely a growing interest. So to answer your question on the kind of sectors that are attracting funding, right? Because it's largely driven by public sector finance and largely into mitigation, you have waste and water and other cross-sectoral projects that are being focused. There is a lot of focus on clean energy. There is a lot of focus on, sanitation, all of that. But in terms of focus sectors for the PEVC impact investors, again, like Dennis mentioned, it is very context specific, country specific, and a combination of creating resilience amongst, vulnerable population as well, right? And adaptation. So across countries, of course, like you, Prabhakar, like you mentioned, climate smart agriculture is definitely a huge focus. There is multi-cropping, there is agroforestry, sustainable aquaculture, all of that. And also because a large part of, if you see the developing countries, it's focused, smallholder farmers form a majority of the agri ecosystem, right? So therefore, there's a lot of focus on climate smart agriculture, climate resistant crops, water resistant crops, all of that. The other sector that's also attracting among financing is the logistics space, route optimization for fuel efficiency, replacing old vehicles with electric vehicles. Battery swapping is coming up again as a big sector, right? So, but all of this said, what is emerging clearly is mitigation, adaptation, and resilience are not alternatives. All need to be pursued actively and in parallel.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Soumya, for that. And you just, I hope you just open the floodgates for your 250 million fund. I'll be the first one to contact you because we as KCL are also supporting a lot of enterprises. And thank you for mentioning that report. I think we should also make that report available, if that is possible, in the chat link, which was co-authored by both CPI as well as KCSE Consulting. Thank you so much again for giving the details of various sections, sectors, and subsectors that go within the adaptation space. I think you have really tried to clear those cobwebs in many people's mind that, adaptation primarily is 80% agriculture or 90% agriculture. But going by your example, Soumya, it is very clear that, there are many sectors and subsectors that we need to look at in terms of looking at the issue of adaptation. And more importantly, it has to be a comprehensive solution. It is not adaptation vis-a-vis mitigation. It is adaptation and mitigation together. Thank you so much, Soumya, for that. Judith, let me come to you. Just wanted to understand from your perspective, Judith, in terms of what are some of the emerging trends. Especially you're working with GSMA, which also pioneers a lot of technologies, and technology obviously has a huge role to play in terms of A, bridging the gap, B, increasing the awareness and the communications and various other things. So from your perspective, what is that you're seeing? What are the emerging trends and what are the emerging technologies which are contributing in accelerating the climate adaptation and resilience solutions?
Okay, thank you very much. I like the question because it just builds up from our previous speaker regarding you have a fund and then GSMA comes in, or we're looking at the private sector from the perspective of mobile and digital technologies. So what we're seeing is GSMA, and because one of the things that GSMA does is we have also an innovation fund. And particularly from the last two rounds, they've been seeking to understand mobile and digital technologies from a climate resilience angle. Of course, the mitigation, adaptation, and resilience is highlighted before. And so some of the trends that are coming up is we're looking at issues of local ownership as far as digital solutions are concerned. And one of the things that comes out rightly when you're giving the fund, the applicants are or what helps the applicant succeed as far as employing some of these technologies, as far as the digital technologies in adaptation, mitigation, and resilience is their understanding of the context. And the context as far as adaptation, mitigation, and resilience varies from different countries. And so that contextualization really helps in terms of understanding, but also deploying mobile and digital technologies. And also just to mention that, as you would know, the issue that comes up a lot of times as far as mobile and digital technologies is access. And so that is also one of the contexts that, the technology or the startups look at. How best can these vulnerable communities, but also definitely generally the communities within that country access that particular technology towards resilience. But then there are also issues in terms of terminologies. I know that's one of the things Denise, mentioned in terms of defining what adaptation, what mitigation, and what resilience is. There's still a little bit of confusion, around what do these terminologies actually mean. And so when you're looking at the kind of projects or startups that are applying, one of the things that GSMA is keen to do is also to build awareness around the terminologies, because it might be simple to us as experts. We could make those demarcations quite quickly, but then there's a thin line when it comes to the implementation bit and also the context. And this also we've seen that has implications as far as future funding is concerned. And it's probably one of the issues as to why you're seeing why, funding is moving towards a lot on mitigation as compared to adaptation, maybe because, there's lack of understanding of what adaptation is, and also implementation. What kind of implementation does one need as far as adaptation is concerned? So that one those are some of the trends that are coming up. And then we also see there's diversity. And as rightly said, that it's not just agriculture. We have agri-tech. We're looking at the digital utility sectors. When you're looking at water and such, we're looking at forestry, and all these mobile and digital technologies are employed differently. There are those that have some sort of convergence. For example, when you're looking at agriculture and forestry because of the land use, and so when you're employing technology, there is some sort of convergence. But then there is diversity. So you'd see that different mobile and digital technologies are used differently to get different results as far as adaptation, mitigation, and resilience is concerned. And lastly, when you're looking at the business models, most of them are B2C. As far as minority are focusing more on the broader ecosystem and enabling environments. And many are still, we're looking at the startups, they're still at the very early stages. And so they're reliant on, financial instruments such as grants and free products rather than revenue making. And so one of the things that GSMA is really ensuring through the Innovation Fund is making sure that the models are quite revenue making at the very end, not just grant based, but how do you relate to the rest of the ecosystem to make sure that they are quite sustainable. Maybe I can stop at that, Rana. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Judith. I'm sure you'll come back with some specific examples also going forward. But what I picked from your conversation, Judith, is quite fascinating, actually. It's not, solutions are obviously important. Contextualization and access is one of the things that we need to really look at. And the diversity aspects are more importantly, what struck me most was the commercial element of that, Judith. I mean, you make them commercially successful, sustainable, obviously the access, the reach would be much, much higher, and it will be creating more impact. Thank you. Thank you so much for those responses, Judith. Back to you, Dennis. Just wanted to, again, we have heard various examples. We have heard the sectors and subsectors. Just wanted to understand from you in terms of what could be some of the climate adaptation and resilience solutions for Sub-Saharan Africa. And within those solutions, which sectors would be prominent in terms of providing those solutions? Which sectors will lead us in actually taking Africa to the next level in terms of going towards neutrality, hopefully very soon? Over to you, Dennis.
Yeah. I mean, as what I already said, adaptation solutions can be found in all sectors, as all sectors are concerned somehow by climate impacts and industries, and they are highly context specific, as the colleagues already mentioned as well. So you often have an interface with other development challenges and SDGs. I mean, to identify a bit with which fields of opportunities one can focus on areas with a strong demand for services and products. So areas which means in this case that have many climate change impacts, like for example, agriculture, that areas where there is a dynamic private sector and where there is an opportunity often as well for public-private collaboration to an extent. So, I mean, as it was already said, one key sector meeting those criteria is agriculture. You have solutions. It's not always very new solutions, I have to say. Sometimes they are in the market for a while, like drought resilient crops or efficient irrigation technologies. I think we have seen for a while. Sometimes it's more about access and making those solutions, bringing them into new markets or into regions that didn't have access to them so far. I mean, there is a lot of focus on IT-based solutions linked to access to climate analytics, information for farmers, or improvements in value chain management via IT-based solutions. And those are becoming more and more relevant, I think, in Africa, but as well in South Asia, we see it a lot. I mean, GIZ is also working a lot in South Asia on those topics. I mean, another important area that wasn't mentioned much until now is urban infrastructure. I mean, many people live in large cities whose infrastructure must adapt to the increasing extreme weather events or heat waves we are seeing. So everything related to efficient and affordable cooling systems And this would be a really great invention, having an affordable cooling system for private households. We're still looking for that company. And water saving technologies for households, but also for industries. So infrastructure development is relevant as well in the bid market. And we see a lot of unmet demand there, I think, as well. And yeah, affordable solutions are key, I think, because expensive high-end solutions are in the market often, I think. So this much.
Cool. Thank you, Dennis. And I was pleased you mentioned urban infrastructure. As a practitioner within the urban space, there is so much that the urban sector can also contribute within this, and there is so many innovations that the private sector can again come in and make the solutions more affordable, because more and more people are moving towards the cities, and we need to have more affordable solutions for the people who are living in the urban space. Thank you so much again, Dennis, for that. Before I come to the next question, can I please request the host to play a video, because the topic is about private sector. So we want to run a video of ERI Hub, who was based in Kenya, who are working within supplying and installing climate smart irrigation technologies. So we would like the audiences to listen to them as to what they are doing, and number one. Number two, what kind of challenges they're facing. And number three, what is their request? What are their requirements going forward to make a more meaningful impact? Also ensure there's better access. So thank you so much. Let's listen in.
Can you play the sound? Unmute yourself.
9 years ago, on her first encounter with an open sewer in Nairobi, Lucy Wanjiku made a promise to focus her studies on engineering for the environment, specifically wastewater.
We can hear the voice, but we can't see the video.
Today, she is a proud...
Technology obviously has access issues. It also has technological issues, I guess.
Yeah.
It always happens. It always has to fail us at the right time, yeah? Can we go again? Can we retry? And I think you're also playing EcoCycles video. We wanted the ERI Hub video.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Climate change has made farming in Africa an uphill task. Farmers invest a lot but get very little returns. ERI Hub leverages technology to provide climate-smart irrigation technologies for smallholder farmers in Africa.
My main reason as to why I ventured into this business was just to make farmers happy. So for a very long time, our farmers have been farming, but we've had stories that they're not making enough money. They're not happy with the kind of produce they get, the quantities, and how they're treated and all that. So I wanted to change that narrative by helping the farmers be able to increase their productivity, be able to increase their income, and also improve their living standards.
Eric grew up in the rural area of Mumias, where he witnessed his parents wait for 2 to 3 years to get returns from farming. He was inspired to change this narrative by introducing high-valued, short-term crops with higher yields for farmers.
With sugarcane farming, farmers have to wait for like 12 to 18 months before they start harvesting, and then before they start getting the payments and all that. I felt like there's a way we could introduce short-term crops where farmers could wait for like 3-4 months, and they plant high-value crops where they can get like higher returns without also depending on rain-fed agriculture as well. Because with sugarcane farmers, they depended heavily on rain for them to be sustainable. So that is what actually inspired me to venture into the agri-tech bit of it on the irrigation sector.
Erie Hub encourages farmers to harvest rainwater, especially during flooding, and utilize this water through drip irrigation for farming. Using Erie Hub's rainwater harvesting technology, which is solar-powered, farmers can produce more quality food to improve nutrition security and boost incomes. Erie Hub is transforming lives through irrigation by building climate-smart adaptation solutions to address real-life challenges facing over 500 million smallholder farmers across the world.
We're looking at 500,000 USD, and we're looking at either in debt or equity investment. And these will go into three main things: rolling out a pay-as-you-go model to help farmers be able to afford these systems. And then also it will go into operations, because we want to open branches in Kenya and also extend our operations to East African market. And then the other bit will also involve getting more inventory to be able to push our products ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that video, and thank you GIZ as well for conceptualizing a program called Private Sector Adaptation Bootcamp, which is trying to support some innovative ideas, especially in the adaptation space, to see how we can do the scale and all. And as you heard from that video, the African youth has tons of ideas. All that they need is, put them into some framework, put them into some structures, and they will really get on with implementation of these NDCs without actually the government actually knowing. The contributions to the NDCs will be faster, will be very efficient, and as the panelists were mentioning, it will have access, it will have local solutions, and it will have a local contextual problem that they are addressing as well. So from that video, I want to go straight to Soumya. Soumya, you heard what Eric was mentioning in the video. I mean, his requirement is pretty simple. He has a fantastic product. He has a fantastic service that he wants to upscale. The challenges he has are plenty. A, he doesn't have capital to upscale. B, obviously he requires some kind of advisory services in terms of taking it to the different regions. So how can the funds that you have just mentioned, Soumya, can come in and help us, help companies like Erie Hub, for example, and how this can be related to the climate adaptation and resilience financing as well. So what does Eric needs to do to tick off the boxes according to your fund requirements so that they can get the access, so that they can grow to scale? Over to you, Soumya.
Thank you, Prabhakar. So in terms of climate adaptation and resilience financing, right, or even what the entrepreneur was mentioning in the video, so if you look at like I mentioned earlier, climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience need to be interlinked. Right, and we were talking about how there's no proper definition and people don't understand mitigation, resilience, adaptation. So when we look at those three aspects, right, when you look at mitigation, it's about reducing emissions, investing in clean energy, EV, afforestation, all of that. And you look at resilience, it's you're creating access to energy, you're creating supply chain readiness, you're creating income and livelihood resilience, right? So that's what you're doing in resilience. And adaptation is all about, like I think Dennis also mentioned, responding and adjusting to climate or the changing climate. So climate resistance crops, water resistant crops, resource efficiency, waste reduction, climate upskilling and reskilling could also be an adaptation. So if you look at adaptation, it goes beyond business as usual. It has to incorporate possible effects of climate change into the design of the products or services that the entrepreneurs offering, right, or the business is offering. So talking about what is required, so from an Avishkar point of view, we invest in sustainable agriculture. We look at financial inclusion as a sector, services as a sector. And third, we talk about, essential services, where any business that creates access to essential services and also creates environment sustainability, right? So all of that falls into essential services bucket. It could be related to energy, it could be related to solar powered ATMs in rural areas, so all of that. So in terms of really the criteria, it should make business sense. It should have a product market fit. It should have a strong founding team. The business should have a strong founding team. And also, there needs to be the impact, because we are an impact funder. Impact is the primary screen for us, right? So it can be impact in terms of resilience, jobs and livelihoods created. It can be access to essential services and products, but with the climate adaptation, from the climate adaptation point of view. And the third thing is also environment sustainability, where how are you looking at resource efficiency, or how is your product or service that you're offering through the business reaching the vulnerable population? So there are a number of aspects that go into while assessing a business for investment, right? And I mean, we've been talking about it has to be context relevant. It has to, have an impact screening as well, right? So all of those criteria need to be met. And today, for equity finance to come in, but if you look at the climate finance, it's largely debt today. Um, and I feel for any investor to come in, it has to have a combination of adaptation, resilience, and the business should be able to create or show returns on investment. So that is very important.
Well spoken, like a true fund manager there, Soumya. Thank you so much. But just a follow-up question on that, just to enlighten the audiences on that. We know that, a lot of private sector companies, especially in Africa, this is again based on the experiences that KCIC had as well when we were supporting the enterprises. There is a reliance on grant funding. Have you noticed or seen any trends in the recent past that the enterprises are more open to debt, equity, or other financing instruments, or there is still a lot of reliance on the debt, on the grant financing?
See, specifically, if you are looking at climate, there is a lot of DFI money that's available, right, when it comes to climate financing. But when you look at broadly the other sector, I think organizations or enterprises are open to PEVC investors. And I think the challenge is also you have early stage investors who are ready to take that early stage risk in companies for them to establish the business model in the market. But when it goes beyond that, once that is done and they need more funding, I think that's where there is a gap, the 10 to 15 million range. There is a huge gap there. And in fact, when we were looking at ESG first fund, right, our focus sectors are again, sustainable agriculture. It is circular economy, right? And we realized that just by providing debt or equity capital or a combination of that is not enough. So we do have a technical assistance facility as well within that. So we want to see how we can enable the companies to move to the next level by giving a softer capital. So there is a combination of capital available, but the entrepreneurs are open to it. But there is also, in the climate space, it's more of debt and grant.
Thanks, Soumya, for that response. So any enterprises who are in this group, you heard it from Soumya. Obviously, you require to generate the impact, but the good thing is most of the funds that we have, especially in Africa in the adaptation space, also comes with a technical assistance facility. So if you are struggling in terms of completing your application, grant management process or equity management process, I think this technical assistance facility will also go a long way in providing support to you to complete that process. Good, thanks for that, Soumya. Again, let me come to you, Judith. We are talking about availability of funds. I think it has been established by the previous speaker that there is plenty of funds that is available. But considering Africa has been, especially in Kenya, if I were to give an example of M-Pesa, penetration of internet and technologies. I think we have been demonstrating a lot of success stories in terms of how technology is kind of getting into the rural areas and how it is changing the landscape of how we view the information, as well as how we are utilizing that information. So just throw some light, Judith, as to how we can leverage it even further. Now we have come from a stage where we were zero, we have come to a stage where we are now able to access, see, feel, touch. But where do we go from here? How can we leverage it even further to customize to my solutions, to my problems, to my local context? Over to you, Judith.
I like what you said because you somewhat summarized with the word M-Pesa a lot of what we would envision mobile and digital technology to do as far as climate financing is concerned. But I would like to look at it in three facets. So the first one I'd be looking at is, or I would like to highlight, would be mobilizing of climate financing. And this is different again, based on the participation on the various sectors. First of all, I know there is a discussion coming up in terms of participation of various sectors in the carbon markets. And that's one of the things that's coming up, especially when you're talking about mobilizing of climate financing in the context of mobile and digital technologies. And this, you see that, technologies such as the Internet of Things, IoT, we see blockchain and also mobile money, rightly said, such as M-Pesa, within the Safaricom context that seem to play a key role, for example, in the participation of farmers in the carbon markets and enabling the farmers to monitor, report, and verify the carbon credits. So that's one of the ways, as far as leveraging mobile and digital technology. The second one is as far as it will be looking at delivering climate finance to the underserved communities. And this is because this would really try to mitigate the traditional hurdles of accessing climate financial services. You would know by the time the farmer or the startup or the community is going to the bank, there are particular requirements that they are expected to provide, such as collateral, which is not available to some extent in such context when you're looking at, for example, like at the underserved communities, such as the gender community. And so in this regard, through mobile technologies, we've seen that there's, borrowing finances at low interest rates. And this is because a lot of the financing pumped to financial institutions and can be borrowed through mobile phones is actually subsidized. And so the interest rates are somewhat different as compared to the market value or the market interest rates. And this has enabled smallholder farmers to buy necessary inputs on time and to adapt to climate change impacts. We see that with the increasing digitization of payments and transactions in the agricultural value chains, you see that smallholders are building financial histories that can be used as loan risk assessment and credit credit scoring. And this significantly has reduced the manual due diligence by financial service providers to provide agricultural credit services. But then also we see that these digital, mobile and digital technologies also provide that sort of digital communication channel, and mobile money services have also played a role in facilitating this. So for example, as long as you have a mobile phone or you own a mobile phone, you have increased the platform or the opportunity to market. So for example, there are marketplaces that are coming up. And so farmers don't have to move from one end of the country to another, but then through a marketplace, through the digital or through the mobile phone, they're able to actually transact. And that kind of communication channel has ensured that, there's increased revenue as far as the smallholder farmers are concerned. And the payments, for example, you don't have to rely on a bank, go to a bank account, no, directly through M-Pesa from one end to the other. And that's quite interesting in terms of agriculture, but also ensuring that the smallholder farmer has received their dues on time. And lastly, maybe looking at data, which is quite instrumental as far as climate finance is concerned. Data collection is quite patchy. And this is because we, climate finance experts or governments rely on physical data collection for most of the data collection bit to kind of ensure that the climate financing is anchored on it. And so we see that mobile and digital technologies, particularly when you're looking at blockchains, it can really help in terms of in terms of tracking of climate finance, but then also in terms of maintaining the trust among the different stakeholders. And so when you're looking at mobile and digital technologies and data, the convergence is on transparency and traceability. And if that, as far as data is concerned, is then realized, then I think there'll be better climate finance flowing, either from a country perspective, but also from a country to a community perspective. So that's quite interesting to see coming up. Thank you.
Wow, that's very insightful, Judith. I mean, any climate flows, when we were doing the study for the climate flows in Kenya, it was quite a Herculean task in terms of mapping the flows from where to where. I mean, just charting that on a flow diagram was such a complex procedure. And here we are coming up with very simple solutions, but most effective solutions where we simply send everything using a click of a button. And then that can be A, the speed is ensured, B, the real-time usability of those funds on the solutions or the problem that I wanted to address in my community is addressed. I think that's brilliantly articulated, Judith, in terms of how this entire technology and the various space can form part and how it addresses the various issues. One of the important thing, Dennis, this is to you. One of the things that Judith was mentioning was also about data. I think as GIZ, I'm sure you would have done a lot of disaggregated data in various bits and pieces, which informs your program design and all. Just wanted to understand from your perspective, Dennis, what could be some of the differences for the private sector, specifically for the entrepreneur who just has an idea and he's not, he or she doesn't know whether it is adaptation or mitigation. Not that they should know, eventually they will obviously come to know, but what could be some of the broad differences, Dennis, in terms of financing a adaptation solution vis-a-vis a mitigation solution?
I mean, when we look at the big differences in the discussion we see as a project, also talking with many stakeholders about private investments into adaptation, one major thing is perception, I think. Mitigation, it was from the beginning, it was very clear it's a private sector issue to some extent. And adaptation has for a long time been seen as a primarily public sector task, like attention has been paid to potentials and demand. So there was almost no attention to the potential or also of the demand of the private sector in climate change adaptation. So there was always a little discussion, but it was never really in the focus. And the discussion of the importance of autonomous private adaptation solutions and business opportunities is not completely new, but it has long been, well, there was some process of UNFCCC in 2010, and then it got lost again. And now it's becoming bigger and bigger now that there are actually adaptation needs and that now the case is there and we need to adapt urgently. So perception is one thing. And also when we say that there are actually adaptation solutions that have a business case, this is usually not the perception because many solutions are also a bit more complicated to finance. But as the range of solutions is so broad, there are also some that are profitable from the very beginning and people are surprised when you tell them. Another difference is I think that the impact of mitigation solutions is so much easier to measure for investors, but also for companies, as you have one established unit, it's greenhouse gas emissions, and one can measure the exact emission reduction. And you can even put a price tag on a technology when you look at the reduction potential. For adaptation, there is not such universally established system or unit. So many impact investors and also companies struggle a bit with the communication around this. How much adaptation do you get for this investment if you look from the impact perspective? But I think this is also a thing that is developing fast, and there are many discussions around this, between investors, and also there are many more offers to companies now to deal with this. And there's also this thing that adaptation impacts are often more interrelated with the achievement of other SDGs, which make them even more interesting for impact investors. But it complicates, the measurement systems. And yeah, I think those are the two big differences we see that are very obvious a bit. And of course, adaptation solution must be tailored very much. So this context specific we have mentioned a lot now. This is also one thing, that there's often a competitive advantage for companies that are on the ground. Mitigation technology you could use everywhere often, as long as the sun is there, you can use solar around the world. For adaptation, this is a bit more specific in many cases. So there is a little advantage for local companies, which is good. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Dennis. I think perception makes or breaks everything. And you put it very rightly that, that's how we feel. And in Africa, our forefathers have been doing adaptation since the beginning of this civilization within Africa. But now with this new concepts, we are trying to fit, this forms adaptation, or whether this is mitigation, which actually something that the African forefathers have been doing a lot. Just to give one example, there is something called as Africa indigenous crops. So with the advent of access to information, more and more entrepreneurs went ahead with something called as safe, just for lack of better example, I just use the word olive farming. You can do that as long as the soil that you have in that locality is able to adapt to grow the olives. But there is a better product, better crop that can be more adapted to the soil, which can be used, which our forefathers knew. But with the advent of technology, sometimes we try to digress into different directions. But if we come back and do the more Africa indigenous crops, A, it gives you more yield, B, it gives more addresses local challenges in terms of food security, and C, it also conserves the soil. These are some things that the World Agroforestry is also kind of advocating. This is something everybody to kind of consider. So let's just break the monotony a bit, and let's get another video from another enterprising private sector, again supported by GIZ program under Pre-Babu, requesting the host to kindly play the video of EcoCycle. The MD of this EcoCycle is Elizabeth, who was supposed to join us as part of the panel. Apparently, she's still having technology issues in joining. But hopefully, through this video, we'll be able to hear very clearly what Elizabeth intends to do as part of providing adaptation solutions in the wastewater treatment sector. Over to you to play the video. Thank you.
Nine years ago, on her first encounter with an open sewer in Nairobi, Lucy Wanjiku made a promise to focus her studies on engineering for the environment, specifically wastewater recycling. Today, she is a proud owner of EcoCycle Limited, a wastewater recycling company whose aim is to ensure safe sewage for Africa.
What made the founders of this organization to start a business is to provide services for wastewater management, and it goes with the fulfillment of the SDG number 6 for clean water and sanitation.
EcoCycle sells and installs wastewater treatment and recycling plants. The recycled waste sewage water is used for secondary activities around homesteads.
When you think about climate change, of course, there's the issue of disappearing forest and green cover. So our end users reuse our water to plant trees and to maintain green cover. If I pick as an example of a residential home on maybe half an acre, you'll find on average every home has about 50 trees. And so if our wastewater is reused to plant trees and create green cover, and we have about, say, 100 homes, and of course our projects are more than 100, that would be about 5,000 trees acting as carbon sinks, providing natural cooling. And also in case of floods, which is a climate change problem, trees would also help to regulate the floods.
Sewage tends to be 95 to 97% water and 3 to 5% sludge. Using a biological sewage treatment system, EcoCycle recycles this sewage water to clean water that can be used for secondary purposes. KCIC Consulting Limited under the Privabu program has provided EcoCycle Limited with professional investor readiness support such as strategy development, development of investment marketing materials, and climate impact investment that has positioned the company for expansion. Within the next 3 years, Lucy believes that EcoCycle Limited will be able to install more than 1,000 installations that would translate to more jobs across the region. Recycling millions of liters of water for secondary use, create more than 3,000 direct and indirect jobs while greening the environment.
So to do all these things after calculating and projecting comes to about $950,000. And what we would be looking at is a mix of debt and a mix of equity, because at the moment, I think I would be willing to release about 10 to 20% equity shareholding.
Thank you so much, Zizi, for showing that video. I am reminded that there is some poll that is happening, so I request every one of you to just go through those polls and respond, so that we also get to hear more from you and which are the topics that we want to highlight. But taking the cue from that video, I'm sure Soumya must be already taking notes in terms of a couple of leads for her funds. But before I come to you, Soumya, I want to go to Judith. Judith, you were briefly mentioning in your previous remarks that, the social inclusion is kind of very critical. Now we have here Lucy, who has come up with some fantastic solution to provide problems to the local challengers. So what do you think that, how technology can play a role in addressing these gender issues as well? Does technology also has a gender lens? If not, how we can completely eliminate that and how we can make it more inclusive?
Thank you very much. I think when you're looking at technology, mobile and digital technology and the gender, this is a discussion that is currently going on with a lot of experts. Not so much has been done to understand the linkages between technology and gender. But we understand that, as far as gender is concerned, the accessibility is an issue. And I would like to draw your attention to a report that was done by GSMA as far as the gender gap report is concerned. And you would see that, for example, a lot of women don't own phones. And if they own phones, they're not registered to their names. And this has an impact as far as the data that is collected is concerned, but also the accessibility of some of the benefits that would come as a result of ownership of a phone, such as financing. However, despite this, I would also mention that, there are some of the issues that mobile and digital technology has breached. So for example, when you're talking about financing, as I mentioned earlier on, we see that despite the challenges of just accessibility of financing generally, as far as collateral is concerned, because if they go to a bank, they would be asked, where's your piece of land? And as you know, in the Sub-Saharan Africa, or even in the low and middle income countries, issues of land are quite controversial as far as the gender group is concerned, or women are concerned. So you find that if women can actually own phones, then they'll be able to access financing, or they can be able to access financing through mobile platforms such as M-Pesa and the like, or M-Kopa and the like. And what I like about this is because then it kind of removes the issue of collateral, because then collateral in this context would be your credit worthiness, how you're paying. So you're not being asked to bring your title deed and such, no, but you can actually bring you can build your collateral through your credit, and that kind of helps a lot in terms of accessibility of loans in the context of climate resilience and adaptation. The other thing I would mention is in terms of increased productivity through precision farming. You find that when you engage mobile and digital technologies sectors such as agriculture, precision agriculture services bring the intelligence and the advisory services to the farm level by utilizing farm-specific agronomic data. And so the farm sensors and such can be able to advise not necessarily the gender as a group, but bearing in mind that smallholder farmers, the majority is actually the gender group. So they can benefit from this. And so it increases in terms of productivity and hence increase in income at the very end. And so this is quite important, even in terms of tailoring the recommendations as far as the crop choices are concerned, what amount of inputs. So you don't have to pump water like the whole day and such. So that really helps in terms of the gender. And the other thing is, as far as climate smart agro advisory services, and this you see is the issue of weather forecasting. And this is quite important because then through mobile phones, you can get SMSs, and particularly because as we mentioned, or as I mentioned, that agriculture, also the gender group is quite a lot. They rely on agriculture as far as their income is concerned. So getting, that kind of information through the phones, through mobile, either in form of SMS, or if you own an Android phone, then you can get the weather forecast and such. That really optimizes the agricultural practices, but also responds to crop pests. Like, for example, the other day, Kenya was quite infested by locusts and such. So you can imagine they are not left behind. And I like what Denise says in terms of integrating some of these things with the SDGs, making sure that no one is left behind. And I think the mobile and digital technology then is enabling that kind of, clarion to be manifested quite quickly. And the last one, of course, as I mentioned, is the issue of the marketplaces. So we don't have to move from one end to the other. No, you can find your buyer, you can get your seller. And, this kind of helps women to participate more, bearing in mind the amount of work, that they have to put in, as far as also the chores and stuff. So they don't have to move from one end to the other. So these are quite interesting findings that are coming up. But as I mentioned, this is a study that is still going on. And we are also exploring more in terms of, how does the mobile money and the gender component integrate. And maybe very soon we'll be able to come back to all of you with quite great insights on the same. Thank you.
If I may come in here, Prabhakar, in terms of what Judith was also saying, right? Some of the things that also we realized through our investment. So one is, of course, creating that accessibility of information, which Judith was talking about, especially in agriculture. We fund an organization called AgroStar in India that offers advisory services, through an app-based solution, right, through an AgTech. So for them specifically, what has happened is because women, because of the social context, women generally don't step out of their house to, buy inputs and all that, because they're making inputs available at the doorstep of the farmer, plus providing advisory services. You have a lot of women taking up agriculture. And some studies also say that, right, women run farms produce 20 to 30% less than men who are leading cultivation. And this is not because there's a lack of aptitude. It is only because there is a lack of access. And so the idea is, and also one of the other investments that we have made, what they are doing is they're incentivizing women. So they procure fruits and vegetables from farmers, right? So if the land cultivated on is owned by a woman, then they give premium to that produce, right? They buy that produce at a premium. And all such small initiatives are encouraging women to participate better, and creating that accessibility is also pushing or creating those inroads for women to participate better.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Soumya, for adding on to what Judith was mentioning. I really like those points, both Judith and Soumya, especially when we were doing, when we try to understand why women entrepreneurship is not coming up. Collateral has been mentioned as one of the biggest challenge, and with the advent of technology, I think those issues can be resolved. Just quickly going through to the next question. Again, this is to you, Soumya. I mean, we heard Lucy, we heard Eric in those videos. I mean, if you can just summarize quickly for us, what could be the entry points and gaps that exist in mobilizing climate adaptation and resilience? Soumya, over to you.
I think EcoCycle is a perfect example of both adaptation and resilient model, right? So just in terms of understanding how innovations and role of stakeholders are evolving at the macro level, right? That will help in directing climate finance. For instance, in say climate smart agriculture, how can you link financial institutions, smallholder farmers, agriculture SMEs, and agtech solutions to create value across the value chain? And then there are definitely some investment barriers that are context specific, right? Like I mentioned earlier, models take time to evolve, and you have early stage investors that invest in early risk uh, enterprises, or take the early risk and invest in innovative business models. But once they are able to establish, these models are able to establish a product market fit, then you don't have the next set of investors who can give them, additional capital, or the 10 to 15 million range. And also sometimes what happens is, in some models, it takes there's a lead time, right? There's a loss of income when you're like moving into certain models, especially that are related to say organic farming, all of that. And it requires investment in new skills or technologies. I think that's where, there's still a gap. It has to move in parallel. And also another entry point, I would say, is climate technology, which is evolving. And there could be specific barriers in understanding the performance of technology itself, right? EV is a classic example. You have like so many different models that are coming up, from battery swapping to charging stations to, vehicles itself, right? But we need to understand the performance of the technology before we can make an investment. And climate adaptation itself involves a lot of actors, right? There needs to be a coordination across sectors to make design and implementation. Sorry.
Sorry for that. Yeah, go ahead, Soumya.
So I'm saying there's a lot of numerous actors in climate adaptation. I think especially when you're dealing with land use and forestry, or even agroforestry, right? So there needs to be coordination between the actors. And I think Dennis also pointed out, Judith pointed out, I think data is very key. There are various climate finance standards, compliance, reporting, but none of them are fully understood. There is no standard definition methodologies, and you need access to data to make the investment decision, right? Which is lacking today. So be it data in agriculture, forestry, or even land use. So all these form somewhere entry points as well as barriers for, climate financing to take off.
Excellent. I think more such questions will obviously come up in the chat as well. But thanks, Soumya, for opening those, for giving those perspectives. I will also encourage all the participants who are here in the room today. The polls are on. Kindly respond to those poll questions. Plus, if you have any question, kindly put it in the chat. I'm going to Dennis now with one last question, and then come straight to the questions that will be pulled from the chat. So Dennis, back to you. I mean, obviously, Soumya did mention about technical assistance facility. Judith did mention about the availability of technologies. You did mention about availability of climate finances that is available. But where do we bridge? How do we bridge the gap? There is money on one side, there are ideas on the other side. We are unable to bridge the gap, and that's where I feel there could be a lot of business, technical advisory services, technical support that can be provided to these enterprises, to the private sector companies, so that they can come up with a commercially successful or sustainable idea. So from your perspective, Dennis, what kind of technical support and partnership is needed to boost climate adaptation and resilient technologies, models, and solutions? Over to you, Dennis.
I think one thing is, of course, I mean, we're working with companies, working with investors, that we are doing kind of a holistic approach, but we also think that market building is actually key. So having an ecosystem approach is promising to integrate different engagement models of investors, support providers we see like KCIC or GIZ, adaptation SMEs, public players to ensure they connect and reinforce each other. So one thing is ecosystem building, building markets, building local structures. I think another important aspect in our view is actually connecting global initiatives with local ecosystems. I mean, adaptation is very context specific, and especially global organizations or the big international ones supporting companies should always look for a strong connection to the ecosystem on the ground. And also investors, I mean, many work in many different countries, and they need to know a bit the realities on the ground and really support solutions that fit into the respective context or were ideally even developed on the ground. I mean, and we also think that mainstreaming adaptation as a business opportunity into existing private sector networks is important, so that we don't start, if we have support structures, we don't create many new initiatives and platforms, which is important as well, but that we also look at what is already well established in the countries and where we should actually mainstream the topic and support in integrating the topic. And so I think for us, we always look at this connection to the things that are already on the ground. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dennis. I think there are quite a few insightful thoughts that you gave, particularly like the ecosystem approach, because the solutions that we have to provide to this private sector is quite complex, and it has to be a 360-degree approach if we want to ensure that this private sector is a successful company, commercially sustainable as well. So on one side, you have to have access to finance. On one side, you need to provide this business advisory services, which is again based on the needs rather than what you have as part of your program. You need to provide these business advisory services based on specific needs. It could be blockchain solutions, as Judith was mentioning. It could be entry point gaps, as Soumya was mentioning. It could be understanding of what it takes to upscale it in terms of adaptation. It could be various things. So I think business advisory services could be a comprehensive one-stop shop kind of a facility that enterprises need. Access to information, obviously, I mean, we heard the panelists speaking here that there is money available, but as an enterprise, I don't know where that money is. I don't know where the tap is, and I don't know how to unlock that tap. So I think access to information also becomes quite critical for this enterprise. To get that, there is a particular fund here, there is a particular opportunity there is a particular technical assistance facility here. And I think the donors, as well as the technology players, as well as fund managers, as well as incubation centers, has a lot of role to play, critical role to play in terms of bridging this information gap. And obviously, sometimes we also hear that the enterprises do face some policy impediments as well. So it has to be a comprehensive solution. That's what I'm hearing from you, Dennis, and networks and private sector opportunities. So thank you so much, dear panel members, for those fantastic responses to the looks like simple questions, but it was quite complex questions as well. And thank you so much. Sorry. Okay, thank you so much for all those people who have also responded to the questions. And we hear Elizabeth has now joined the team. Elizabeth, are you there? Can you say hello to us? Elizabeth, are you there? In case you're speaking, you're on mute. Okay, hopefully she will come up. But Elizabeth, if you're able to hear us, if you're able to, if you are in a position to speak, please let us know. Meanwhile, let me go ahead and take some questions from the chat. Let me start from the bottom. There is a question from Grace Mwangi. The question is, could a fintech like M-Pesa, being a powerhouse in several African countries, discourage other mobile companies to develop mobile money climate finance technologies? What can be done to enhance access to climate finance, especially by the smaller industry players? I think the question is quite clear, Judith. I think I'll come to you with that question if you want to take that.
Yes, sure. Thank you for the question, Grace. I think maybe M-Pesa has been there for quite a long time, and maybe that's why people resonate to Safaricom and M-Pesa and such because of its existence. But I can tell you that there are other fintechs in Sub-Saharan Africa that are coming up, as far as that are providing the same services such as M-Pesa. M-Pesa has gone, maybe yards, farther as far as developing products and services that are they resonate to climate financing, and maybe this is why a lot of people in the field are referred to M-Pesa. But definitely, I can mention that this is a discussion that a lot of fintechs are actually looking at. And now that you're talking about alternative financing in as far as climate adaptation and resilience are concerned, a lot of industry players and fintechs, our innovators are trying to see what else can be done. Not necessarily from that perspective, but you can see others coming up as far as looking at cryptocurrency and such. So I can boldly say that other innovations are coming up, and so they wouldn't discourage other mobile companies to develop. No, I think it's also a market thing. So the market will dictate, and that's the safest answer I can give as far as this question is concerned. Yeah, and what can be done? Of course, I think more innovations can be done. Innovators definitely are thinking about this, but then the whole discussion of what is adaptation, what is mitigation, clarifications as far as these terms are concerned, I think that's quite an issue as far as innovators are concerned, because they're not subject experts. And so they would need subject experts. And what Denise said is you have to work within an ecosystem as far as climate adaptation and resilience is concerned, for you to also integrate finance into it. It's not just an issue of just the innovations, but you understanding the subject. And I think that's quite important to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. And I hope, Grace, you're satisfied with that response. Next question is from Jemima Nyakwara. I think this question falls into your bucket, Soumya. If you can give us the question is it possible to break down some of the investment prospectus covering all sectors, especially sectors not considered to be related to climate change? Example, air quality, investment options for the health sector. And related to that would be for your group as a venture capital, do you consider climate proofing industrial sector as an adaptation solution or a mitigation solution?
I was thinking about the question, and there is no sector that doesn't have a climate angle to it or an environment sustainability angle to it. So air quality too is somehow related to climate. And, it's very hard to point out sectors or subsectors that are not specifically related to, climate. So I really don't have an straightforward answer to that, unless Dennis can think of some subsectors that are not directly linked to climate. And as far as considering climate proofing industrial sector as an adaptation, frankly, I really don't know how it should fit into our mandate, right? So we can invest in any model or, assess a model on many different angles. But I think the ultimate thing is it should meet our focus sectors, and it should meet our impact and ESG screening criteria as well, for us to, look at that. We don't have a specific climate adaptation mandate where we say, okay, these are the models we'll invest in. We are an impact investor. For us, it's very important that we are, creating value on ESG. It is very important we are impacting the vulnerable population through jobs and livelihood creation, or we're creating environment sustainability. So, or providing access to essential services and products as well.
Thank you, Soumya, for that, and I hope you are answered, Jemima. This one is one of my favorite questions, so I'm taking it ahead of other questions. This is from Lisbeth. Invariably, this question keeps coming up in most of the climate discussions. I can check with the Resilience Hub as well if this question has been asked multiple times across all the topics that we have. The question is about the developing countries or developed countries committing to the 100 billion finance, addressing the 100 billion financing gap. So Lisbeth wants to know how's that going. So Dennis, maybe you can come in and help us on that.
Where in the chat do I see the exact question? I'm
It's on the chat. The last question from Lisbeth.
The last question. So I was how is that going? That's a good question. I think there is a big discussion around adaptation and around the global shield for loss and damage now. So I think it's how is it going is difficult to answer. I think it has gained relevance, and I think for the adaptation discussion, the COP in Egypt now will focus very much also on this financing question. So I think it isn't solved. It's not like we have we have the 100 billion together and we can check it on the to-do list and it's done. But I think it has some prominence now because we see actual climate impact. It's in the public discussion. We see what is happening in Pakistan. We see what is happening in East Africa. And the Egyptian COP is in Africa and will place a lot of attention, at least on the adaptation topic and on the question how to deal with it. And from this private sector perspective, I mean, this is of course not the 100 billion we are talking about. But what we see is that the discussion is becoming more and more relevant and active. But the political question about the financing, I think it's not solved, right? It's not like the finance. Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis, for that. And the number is always exciting, the 100 billion, and especially countries in Africa are really looking forward to this. And that's where I think Lisbeth is also coming from. And hopefully the COP that we are having later this year will also give some more clarity in terms of the roadmap. But I think the developed countries have safely moved this target to 2023. They were supposed to start committing to this 100 billion every year. I think it was supposed to start in 2021 or 2022, one of those years, but they have now moved it to 2023. And I hope this doesn't become a moving goalpost. And hopefully this Africa Summit, it's the home turf of African nations, and hopefully the African negotiators are doing a fantastic job this year to lock that in, and hopefully we'll get the money which will resolve a lot of adaptation issues in the continent. So hopefully, Elizabeth, that answers. Let me take that. Oh, Lisa, this question was not asked. Hopefully, day 4, day 5, this question will come up in one of the regional hubs. Hopefully. Anyways, Soumya, this is again to you. This is from Josu Argidus. I hope I pronounced that name right. Apologies if I haven't. How do you evaluate the adaptation relevance of the business you invest in? I heard you mention that you have a fund. It doesn't have a specific adaptation focus, but if there is an innovation that has a specific adaptation, how do you evaluate it?
So to answer that, right, we have a very strong impact evaluation framework where we assess, various elements that the business needs to have and how integrated impact is within the business model itself. So we look at, impact screening as the primary criteria, and adaptation is a sub part of it, right? While we look at impact, we also see what could be the negative impact, and that could be in terms of even environment. We identify 2 or 3 KPIs that are most relevant to the business model, and that could be even adaptation. It could be in terms of, are they wasting a lot of, or using water efficiently in the manufacturing process, or how are they disposing of water waste. So we do look at many things, and how is, say, if it is into inputs, how is it leading to productivity increase? right? Because of quality inputs, making them accessible at the doorstep of the farmer. How is it actually leading to productivity increase? So we have a set of KPIs that we try to understand and benchmark them as well as forecast them. So through the investment period, we try to understand how this entire impact is evolving, right? And uh, again, when we look at adaptation, it becomes a part of our impact assessment itself. So and like Dennis rightly mentioned, with respect to mitigation, you look at greenhouse gas emission reduction. Adaptation is a lot more difficult because data measurements, it requires a lot more effort being put into it.
Okay, thank you, Soumya, for that. I think just to add on to that, Soumya, AFDB earlier this year came up with a tool, I guess, which also talks about climate financing, specifically with the adaptation aspects. And when we were implementing a couple of programs, including the Privabu program, Dennis, we did employ that tool to see what kind of climate adaptation risks are there and how that can be mitigated and how that can unlock additional climate financing for the adaptation solutions. So there could be many solutions, but it is, as Soumya was mentioning, that's a brilliant point, Soumya, it's quite complex. And that's where we need to have systems and maybe technology, Judith, which will simplify the processes for us. I see Elizabeth.
If I may add here, right? So one of the things I think we are also discussing as a community of investors, right, on how we can adopt climate assessment within the investment processes itself. And most of us are looking at ESG assessments. We are doing a risk analysis already. And can we include climate transformation within that scope as well? Instead of looking at it separately, can it be part of the ESG assessment itself that we do anyway for the business model? I think that sort of also gives us some sense on in terms of what is the impact the business model is creating on climate in some sense, right? Or even resilience for that matter. So I think most of them are looking at adopting that approach, making it a part of the ESG assessments today.
Brilliant. So I think that's a good addition. Thank you, Soumya, so much for that. Elizabeth, can you hear us? Brilliant. Welcome,
yes,
welcome, and apologies for all the technological issues that you had. If you want to quickly introduce yourself, Elizabeth, I have a specific question. I want to really get on with putting you on the spot. Elizabeth, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunate, yeah, it had to be today, one of those bad days, but I'm glad to be here and thank you for having me. Yeah, so we're a land restoration company. We are Botanic Treasures, and we are handling two issues in Kenya. That is issues of health and wellness by using the Moringa oleifera tree and other useful medicinal trees. And we're incentivizing our farmers with that so that they're able to preserve the environment as opposed to charcoal burning and using these trees as firewood. So by buying the byproducts of these trees, then we are encouraging them to grow more, and we are also ensuring there is food on the table and they have money in the pocket, so they can use that money to now do other things as opposed to selling charcoal or firewood.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. As a private sector entrepreneur yourself, Elizabeth, just wanted to understand your perspective and also give some more thoughts to fund managers, program designers, as well as technology representatives who are present in this group. Yeah. What has been your experience, Elizabeth, in terms of as a solution provider, when you approach financial institutions, financial service provider, be it grant, equity, debt, whatever instrument that you're trying to source, what has been your experience? And if you can also, without naming anyone, if you want to give any specific examples of the troubles or the ease of finance that you could get, we would be very happy on that, Elizabeth. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, in terms of fundraising, as we would call it, it's not been easy, because as an SME first is being prepared to actually know what to expect when you meet the funding, the fund managers. So having your your business plan, having all an understanding of what is their scope, so that they can be able to fund you, knowing the numbers, knowing the impact, because impact is a lot of people who come in the space of land restoration. Impact is one of the key areas. So as an SME, that is a challenge, being able to actually measure your impact and having simple tools to do that. So those are challenges we face, preparing the information to be able. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. Having that information and having a sound business plan that is able to capture some of the areas. But as a business person, sometimes you get overwhelmed in that you're in a forest of trees and everything is important, and now having to trickle down to some of the key areas that you think the funding agent or person needs, or are their main points. So being prepared with that information is not easy for an SME, and that is why people like organizations like Kenya Climate Ventures come in hand, because now they help us to come up with sound business plans. They help us to be investor ready. They help us with the pitching process. They help us to really be clear on the ESGs and the SDGs that we are actually focusing on. And it also helps us with knowing, going even for like summits where we can meet like funding agents is also good. And also having the funding people themselves visit us to see what we are doing, because it's one thing to just sit behind a camera and explain what your business is doing, and it's another thing to actually go on the ground and see the people who are being affected by and being who are using your services, whose lives are being transformed. I think it's a very good experience. I've not come across a funding agent who would be interested to actually come and see what we are doing. In the Rakanivi County, we have about 1,500 farmers who we are incorporating in a food forest activity. So those are some of the key areas that I feel investment, before we even meet the funding agents, we need to be clear on that. The challenges I've seen with the few that I have had an opportunity is the ticket sizes. Sometimes the ticket sizes are either too high or too low. And the requirements, sometimes as you're growing your business, you may not have reached that level of what they expect or the impact they're looking for. And the lack of now the having figures on impact, because we don't have simple apps to be able to collect this information. Like we've been trying to get organic certified. There's so much paperwork to do. And with this, a lot of that paperwork, everything is manual. If we could have an app that is simple, you can be able to collect information of all your farmers, even of what is happening in your resource farm per block, what is being grown, how long it takes, what have you been using to control pests and things like that. So yeah, those are some of the challenges in-house and also as we go to meet the funding agents.
Brilliant. Those practical insights, Elizabeth, has been brilliant. You came late, but I mean, the points you made are quite compelling. Thank you so much. And here we are in a typical dichotomy where companies like Elizabeth are going around financial institutions looking for money, while the people who have the tabs which has money in it are also saying there's a lot of money we don't have in interesting cases to invest in. And that takes me to the fantastic question asked by, I think this is, where is that question? Yeah, Brenda Chekata. She's talking about communication. I think this is where the bridge also happens between the funders and the people who are seeking the funds. The question is, how important is communication raising awareness of adaptation needs, and what kind of communication plans do your organizations employ, and how best can communication professionals be empowered in the sector? Maybe this is such a general question and such a relevant question. Maybe each one of you can take a minute to respond to that, starting maybe with Dennis, Soumya, Judith, and Elizabeth in that order, if that's okay.
I mean, communication, when we think about communication, we usually go via partners on the ground. I mean, like existing we raise awareness about adaptation needs and climate change impacts, working with partners that have an outreach in the countries where we are active, and try to reach companies. And it's part of our ecosystem building approach somehow. I mean, that's a different thing, supporting companies in developing communication plans about their own activities and learning how to communicate their own impact. This is something we do with the target group. But when you look at adaptation on a broader scale of bringing adaptation needs in a public discussion, it's something we deal with platforms and partners on the ground. And it's ecosystem building, I would say.
So communication is definitely important, and how you communicate and how you present information is very, very important, right? And therefore, we do work with companies to ensure that we are aligned. So it's not we are asking for X and they're giving us Y. So, or, they're sharing a very different set of information. So it's very important communication with the company, open communication with the company on what is possible, what is not possible is very important. Like Elizabeth was talking, right? You can't quantify every metric. Some things are non-quantifiable, qualitative in nature. So you need to understand what is it that you are able to track, and what is it that, over a period of time, you're enabling the company to track, maybe not immediately, but at a later stage. So therefore, this communication becomes a key component here. I'm talking from a funder perspective. So bear with me. I don't know how best can communication professionals be empowered. You need to understand what you're communicating and in what context you're communicating. I will just leave it with that.
I will add on to what Denise and Sonia also said. I want to look at it also from the lens of what Denise said as far as the ecosystem is concerned. Communication has to be all-rounded for adaptation to work and resilience to work. For example, if you're looking at it from a government or community perspective, it's very important for the policies to be quite communicated properly, because every country has its own set of policies that govern adaptation, but even as far as financing is concerned, what these policies support, because of course there is, the different agencies between the government and the community and their implementing partners. So what role do they play? So that kind of communication is quite important. But also from the community to the government, because if they communicate the impact, then the government will know what to plan, what budgeting allocations to have. So that part is actually almost missing, because then you find that kind of reciprocating communication is not there. But it's quite important when you're looking at the climate flows, very important. But then the private sector come up with these alternative sources of communicating. We're talking about Safaricom and the like, when they have M-Pesa. Where do they fit in the ecosystem? And so if you have a well-rounded communication plan, then definitely I think you would see more impact, but even the quantifiable issues that are being talked about, then data will flow, because then we are communicating. But then I would say from a mobile and digital technology, then if you have systems that embrace this real-time kind of communication, that, as our colleague said, you don't have to manually actually input this communication in terms of data, then I think then there is, a more lively, for lack of a better word, ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judith. Elizabeth, you have any perspectives on how you heard about these funders, for example, and what role did communication play in that? You're on mute.
Actually, I would want to give my perspective on how, as a business, we are able to reach the farmers. Okay, we don't have an app at the moment that we can be able to communicate to the whole lot, but we do use grassroots methods. So we have meetings in schools because we have a school greening project where through the Trees for Nutrition, we have introduced the growing of trees in schools and competition between classes and competition between schools so that we can have the whole community joining in the land restoration project. This was a project that the former president, had endorsed through uh, the school greening project. So we actually go into the schools, we talk to the head teachers, and then we are appointed a teacher who is able now to oversee that whole exercise happens. When we get to the community, we have been going to having barazas, we call them barazas or chiefs meetings. And through the chiefs meetings, that's where now we share seeds, and we also encourage them to visit the resource center and get training. We've put the farmers in groups. So through groups, there is a peer education. And there's also the leaders who we train at the resource center. So as a business and as a community, that is what we are doing on the grassroots. When it comes to getting in contact with funding agencies, for us, it's mainly either through accelerators or like with the Kenya Climate Ventures and others, or WRI. We are also one of the beneficiaries for land restoration. So it is through their networks and through their platforms that now we get opportunities to meet investors or funding agencies and be able to pitch and have a back and forth of what we are doing on the ground and what if it's in line with their expectations. So that's how we've been doing it.
Again, brilliant, Elizabeth, for those practical perspectives, because as fund managers, as program managers, as accelerator ourselves, we design programs with whatever little understanding we have. But do we consider those barazas into our perspective? Do we consider those farmers into those perspectives while designing communication? I think you have given us a very good perspective there. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, as well as thanks Dennis, Soumya, and Judith for your perspectives as well. Going to Amil Harikushan's question, he is asking that, in a previous hub session, a speaker noted that there needs to be a mindset shift from investors where investing in businesses are prioritizing a resilience impact. Are we seeing this mindset shift, particularly beyond investors that are already in the impact investment space? So Soumya, I hope you got that question. This is to you.
So he's not talking about impact investors. He's talking about beyond impact investors, whether there's a mindset change. See, it's hard. It varies between regions, but there is definitely a greater understanding of climate impact, right? So, I mean, you can build as many businesses as possible, but a flood can wash out the entire business in a day, or all the money invested in a business is gone because you haven't addressed the basic problem of climate change. So everybody understands this. There is a growing consensus on investing in climate technologies. In fact, a lot of funders are looking at innovative models. So there is definitely a mindset shift towards climate adaptation.
Sante, thank you so much, Soumya, for that. I think I'll take one last question before I hand over to Michelle. This is from Pamela. I think she has two questions. One question is directly to you, Dennis. She's asking, what are the programs is GIZ implementing to achieve the goal of climate adaptation? Because she feels it requires significant investments And to all the panelists, but maybe in the interest of time, if this is okay with you, Pamela, I'll ask that question to two panelists instead of all panelists. Or maybe this is such an important question that let me ask it to all the panelists. So once Dennis responds, Dennis, you can also give your thoughts on the second question, which is about what is your idea of success for Africa at COP27? And then you can pass it on to Soumya, Judith, as well as to Elizabeth for that second question.
So yeah, first question. GIZ has many programs, I think, in Africa to help raising investment into adaptation on all kinds of levels, especially also in Sub-Saharan Africa. Often we work on the government level, and I have to say we have many other problems where we focus on SME support, and often they are not at the same time focusing on adaptation. So we are a bit of a pilot bringing the two topics together. I think there's one other similar project in Francophone Africa. So it depends a bit from what perspective you're coming. So there are many projects focusing on this gap, bridging this adaptation gap, working with cities, like the Cities Finance Facility, working also with other donors on those topics, working on the government level to help make up investment plans, come up with project pipelines. And there are other projects working with SMEs, many of them working with SMEs in the agricultural sector who have adaptation as one topic, but not as the only topic. So if you really want an overview, send me an email. We can come up with more specific advice on concrete project that might be relevant for you because it's so broad. And we have many, I mean, climate change is one of the main topics of German development cooperation. So we have a broad portfolio. Idea of a success for Africa at the COP27. I think one thing is also outreach, visibility. We are bringing the adaptation topic and the African needs back into a global discussion, and having this perspective of the problems actually existing in Africa at this point. I think this is really one part of the opportunity in this Egypt COP. Beside the negotiation as itself and the actual result that we can get on the global shield and all the different topics that will be negotiated, I think visibility will be one major point. And this would be actually a success if this could get into the public discussion in the developed countries, because with the war going on in Europe and many other issues in the public discussion at this point, it would be good from our perspective to have it a bit back on the table from a GIZ perspective, because all the implications for climate change for Africa sometimes get a bit lost. And I think this is one good thing from our perspective about having an adaptation-focused COP in Egypt now. Yeah, which is just as one first point.
So in terms of success of Africa and COP27, so having perhaps like a common position on issues that are affecting the entire continent, I think that would be really important. The second is creating a clear roadmap. I understand from one of the reports that 51 countries out of 53 have NDCs today, but can we create a clear roadmap to achieve climate adaptation? The third thing is really creating accountability, right? So yes, you have set your goals, yes, you have a clear roadmap, but are you being accountable? And it can be for African countries and across even developed countries across. So 3 things.
From my end, I think, appreciating that everyone has a role as far as climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience in the context of Africa would be quite appreciated. But also looking at what does everyone bring into it, more specifically, and quite biased from a GSMA perspective. How does digital technology then fit into the whole climate change, but also climate finance nexus? I think a lot has been said, but there is quite nascent information on how technology then fits within the nexus. And that's why, for example, GSMA is currently now taking a lead as far as coming up with a research report on the role of mobile and digital technology in the climate finance nexus in low and middle income countries. So that's coming up, and hopefully then that would also kind of help private sector institutions, and specifically MNOs, the mobile network operators and other digital techs, to see where they fit in. I think that would be quite exciting to see. Thanks.
I think for me as an SME in this space, and I beg to digress a bit, would be, I mean, right now climate change has hit, I'll talk about Kenya. We've had the cold season from July up to now. It's just ending, and drought. There's famine. There are people, about 4 million, as the statistics are saying. But sometimes I try to, even when I go to forums, I try to get other SMEs to really identify what is their specific role in changing that where we are heading, changing this whole issue of climate change one step at a time. What is that activity as an organization or a company or an SME, or even a tree nursery planter in the village? Do they see, do they understand what their role is and how they can actually make it happen one tree at a time? Are there opportunities that they see in their space they can actually exploit? Because for me, when I look at my farmers, we are in a semi-arid region, and there are many rivers flowing from Mount Kenya. But these farmers have yet to understand what that permanent river can do for their maize or trees or anything. And that's because they do not have basic or sustainable irrigation that is affordable in that community. There's nobody hiring irrigation kits or simple ways for them to actually be able to move out of being adapting actually and being resilient. So they're just waiting on the rain, and climate change has affected that pattern, and they still have not come into terms with that. So what do? They turn to the trees, they turn to what is already there to try and solve an urgent problem, which needs a long-term solution. And for me, it really saddens me, and I feel my government, Kenya, has a major role to play, because that's not the only region where you go and you'll find stunted maize next to a big river, and there's no connection in the mind of this farmer between irrigating their maize or planting climate resilient crops or seeds, or even planting trees. So for me, that would be, for me as a country and as Africa, it's to stop, handling things at board meetings and board level, and come to the grassroots where the farmer is and begin to do it practically. When I was growing up, we had many agriculture officers who would actually go out there and do hands-on kind of technology or knowledge transfer, which I see is now missing. And it's something that as a country we need to go back to, so that we can solve the issue of climate change from the grassroots, because that's where it actually starts. So sustainable models of doing things. Yes, I also feel post-harvest handling has not been dealt well in our country. There's a lot of loss of anything. We always have, in December, we have too many rotten mangoes. Tomatoes, you'll find them being sold a whole bucket at 80 shillings. When it's off season, they're going for like 600 shillings. So affordable technology, again, affordable technology in the drying space, affordable technology in irrigation. And I feel that can really help to actually fuse the real climate change tangible solutions that we need. Agroforestry is very important. And that's why as Botanic Treasures, we have gone into food forests, where we are encouraging now the farmers to actually intercrop their staples with the trees, because the trees will shield their crops. So, and because there's too much, the heat is too much, then they can actually be able to have a good harvest. So for me,
I
it
think
is
those are
the government coming to the ground and helping the people to actually understand the opportunities they have and harnessing that.
No, thank you so much, Elizabeth. I think I feel like we should be hearing more from you. Unfortunately, the technology did not allow us to do that from the start. But I'm cognizant of the time, and I see Michelle already popping in because there's another session that has to run in. Just my 4 key takeaways from this session. First of all, thank you so much to all my panelists who have given some fantastic insights. I wouldn't be doing a justice in summarizing it. Hopefully, we'll be producing a report which summarizes all those points. But few things which has really hit me is for all the private sector companies, funding is available. There is no problem. The tap of funding is available. We have to just locate that tap where it is and how it can flow, the systems, the processes, and hopefully technology will play a big role in streamlining that. Second, it's not for Africa as a solution for private sectors. It's not adaptation vis-a-vis mitigation. It's adaptation plus mitigation, which will give a comprehensive solutions for us to fight the climate change in Africa. Third point, which I think Dennis was kind of very clearly mentioning, is an ecosystem approach. It's not one actor doing their part while the other actor is not doing their part. It's a enabling thing that we need to do, and it's a comprehensive ecosystem approach that we need to take. There is also lessons that we can take from global initiatives, provided it is customized to the local solutions. And lastly, the role of technology can never be underestimated in this whole space of climate adaptation. So those are my key takeaways. Hopefully, we'll come back with a specific report summarizing a few things on this, and Michelle will take it to all the way to the African leaders and the negotiators, and bring us what Elizabeth wanted, what Judith wanted, what Dennis wanted, and what Soumya also wanted in terms of successes for this COP27. With that, thank you so much for patiently hearing to us. Thanks again to the participants. Thanks again to the hub. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. I just want to echo your thanks to all the speakers, participants, and to you, Prabhakar. Thank you very much. This session has been great. So we're going to close the session now, and I just encourage you all to go back to the lobby after you've left this session. There's going to be a great session on food security in Africa through productive soils that's being held by the Africa-led partnership, which I think might be of interest, and also to encourage participants to stay right till the end today. We're ending off at 4 o'clock today, learning about water scarcity in Tunisia's internal regions. And I know we're going to hear from quite a few young people in that session as well. So I encourage you to stay right to the end. And thank you, everybody, for this great session. It's been very informative. Bye.
Thank you very much, Prabhakar, for the wonderful moderation, and Dennis and Judith and Elizabeth. Wonderful meeting you all. Hope to keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.